Hey everyone, this is Julia.
And this is Chris, and this is episode number 48 of the Mixology Talk podcast.
Now, last week, we were in a bar. This is I think we've started pretty much every podcast that way.
I think so.
So last week, we were in a bar, and Chris ordered a gin martini. But he didn't just order a gin martini, because the waiter quickly replied and said, "How would you like it?"
Yeah, he actually asked me if I would like it on the rocks or if I would like it up. And at that point, we thought, hey, that's an interesting podcast that we could talk about, is that the vocabulary of drinks.
Ordering drinks.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of, it is a language. There are meanings behind these words, and just kind of put them out there and just kind of talk about what they mean.
Exactly. So today we're going to start with words about the spirit themselves.
Yeah, and when I first started tending bar, there were three main categories of spirits. There was the very first one, which is usually the cheapest for the consumer and the cheapest for the bar, and that was the well.
So the well is both like a category of spirit, which classifies something as being inexpensive and kind of high volume, but it's also a physical location in the bar, right?
Right. It sits in the well. So it's kind of like this triple meaning almost.
In the well.
Exactly.
I wonder why they came up with that name.
I have no idea.
Weird.
No idea.
But the well is like physically closest to the bartender. It's right within reach, and they're often the bottles that have those little pour spouts on them. They don't even bother to cap them. They use them so often.
So if you were to walk up to a bar and just say, I would like a gin and tonic, and you don't specify a brand or anything else, you just say, I want a gin and tonic, I want a rum and coke, I want a vodka soda. That's what you're going to get. You're going to get something right out of the well. It's going to be typically the cheapest price point. Mm-hmm. And yeah.
I think that makes sense, though, because I think the bar, or I should say the industry as a whole, is making an assumption that unless people specify otherwise, they want the cheapest option available.
Sure.
Because if you want something more high-end, you're going to specify.
You're going to ask for it.
Exactly.
Right.
And you have that option. And actually, the next step up would be
the call. And this is kind of where the brands start to get into play here, because you're calling for the alcohol that you want in there.
So you're not going to go, okay, I'd like a gin martini, call.
No, you're not going to say, ring, 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 ring.
I would like a
gin martini.
Gin martini, please.
Right. What kind would you like? I called it. Duh. No.
This explains the weird looks I was getting at the bar last week.
So the way it works is you would go up to the bar and say, I would like a Tanqueray martini. You're calling the brand.
Out the brand. I see what you did there. That makes so much sense.
And that category is kind of a giant catch-all, and it gets a lot more muddled with modern drinks.
I see
man.
what you did there.
Oh, that was just so natural for me. But it gets very blurred these days, with all the different kind of spirits out there and, the craft spirits. These lines are definitely much more blurred. But the general idea is that you're calling for the brand.
Right, which means it's typically going to be a brand that is a little bit higher end than what's in the well.
Right.
And therefore, the drink, when you get your bill, is going to be a little bit more expensive.
Exactly. Yeah. And then the next step up is the premium. And things have really changed since I first started tending bar, but basically this is another word for it is top shelf. If you order a top shelf margarita, these are kind of the more expensive brands out there. The brands that have something even higher than their regular stuff.
So this would be like a Tanqueray 10 or a Bombay Sapphire or something like that.
Right, exactly. Because Tanqueray has their regular, and then they have their flagship or their higher end stuff, the 10. Same thing with Bombay regular or Bombay Sapphire.
So in these cases, once again, you are calling out the fact that you want a premium spirit, and therefore you are going to be paying a little bit more for your cocktail.
Right, exactly.
Once again, even more than the call spirits. And I think it's interesting to note from a consumer's perspective, it makes sense. But also from a bar's perspective, it makes sense as well. Because all of these different bottles cost a huge spectrum of prices.
It's a huge variance.
And it just doesn't make sense for them to put every single bottle into their system, and have 100 different prices for a gin and tonic based on what gin you choose. Yeah. So that's where these categories come into play for the bar and why they kind of make sense for the consumer.
I've worked at a couple bars that they have a very kind of streamlined and really simple way of pricing, and it was done by dots. So you would have like a blue, green, or red dot.
I think I went to a garage sale like that once.
Right. I think the prices were a little bit more expensive.
25 cents.
But if the bottle had a green dot, for example, it was the well, and it would have a certain price point. So a well drink would be $4. If it had a blue, it would be a call. Anything with a blue sticker was a call.
So the bartender would see the sticker, and he would put it in the POS
the register, right.
accordingly.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense.
So each dot had a price.
Corresponding price.
So a lot of this is kind of a legacy from that. These could be still applicable to kind of modern
Yeah,
bar scenes.
definitely. So there's one last sort of description, and it's not really for spirits. It's a little bit more for wine, and that is house. If you order a house wine, what are you going to get?
So house wine is typically the cheapest, the cheapest price point for the consumer, and once again for the bar. And it's
right.
Basically just give me either a glass of white or red, and that's your choices typically.
Or mix them together.
Yeah,
Call it rosé.
Rosé.
But I think thanks to the fact that typically a lot of restaurants and bars go through quite a bit of their house wines, it means that they can often get these for an even lower price point because they have the ability to negotiate. So it doesn't mean you're getting something terrible. It really can be a great deal. It's just, it might be something different every week. It's just something that is a lower price point for the consumer.
Yeah, and it's never, you can walk into just about any bar or restaurant, and if you just are in the mood for wine and you don't want to look at their wine list, you could just say, I would like a glass of your house white or red.
Pretty safe.
Yeah, it's a great default order.
May not be a great glass of wine, but
yeah,
you're going to get wine.
Exactly. Exactly.
So moving on to the words that talk about how the cocktail's actually prepared and served.
Yeah, this one is...
I think this sort of category became popular thanks to a certain special agent.
Special Agent 00, that rhymes with Blevin.
That's not a word.
I know, but it's funny because it rhymes with 7. Oh, I gave it away.
You gave it away.
Oh,
dear.
We're ending
yes,
this. Yeah.
This, in case you haven't guessed, I'm referring to the fact that you can order your martini shaken or stirred.
Right. So once again, you walk up to the bar. I would like a Tanqueray martini shaken or stirred.
Makes
like
sense.
mine stirred, just saying. But
well, and I think that this doesn't come up very often for things that aren't martinis, right?
not really, no.
Because if I was to go up to your bar and I said, I would like a Manhattan shaken, not stirred.
Yeah. And?
I was expecting you to say you'd punch me.
I would never punch you.
Oh, okay. If some other lady you didn't know. So somebody walks up to your bar and they order a Manhattan shaken, not stirred. What do you say?
I would shake it, and then I would beat them with it. No, I mean, of course, the customer's always right. If they want me to shake their Manhattan...
They want to get beaten with their cocktail.
If they want me to shake their Manhattan, of course I will. But then I'm going to make them a stirred Manhattan and offer that up and say, which one do you like better?
You're going to make two.
I am. The price of education.
And charge them for both, obviously.
Damn right, and then beat them twice.
Please don't beat your customers.
No.
Disregard Chris.
Unless they ask for a shaken Manhattan.
In which case...
Beat them.
I don't know anything.
Beat them.
The moral of the story is that really when it comes to spirit-based cocktails, the martini's the only one you can really get away with shaking.
Typically, yeah.
In my humble opinion. Not that you asked for it.
It's all preference on that point.
Right.
I mean, there are diehards that say you only stir spirits, and there's people that order martinis and they're like, you better shake the living hell out of it. And when
Yeah.
you strain it, I want to skate across the top of it.
I've heard that before.
Yeah, and I could have it either way,
Exactly.
honestly. Yeah. So the next way is actually how it's actually served in the glass. For example, you could have let's just say Grey Goose martini shaken, and then the next thing you would ask for is how do you want it served? Do you want it served on the rocks?
Which would be in a rocks glass with ice.
Right.
Or,
Up.
which I'm going to go ahead and assume means is a martini glass because it's physically up off the table.
Yeah, exactly. So you
okay.
would separate the ice from the liquid, and all you would have in the martini glass would be just the chilled liquid without any ice.
Right.
So that is what is called up. And then there's one last way of putting the spirit in the glass, and that is called neat.
Now, this is one that was confusing to me because neat means put it in a rocks glass without any rocks, right?
It could be, yeah.
But it's typically not done for cocktails. It's usually for single spirits, right?
Yeah, and the way, I could be completely wrong on this, but the way I understand this, when people call for this, is basically open a bottle, grab a glass, and pour the contents of that bottle into the glass without ice. Never touching ice, room temperature. Yeah, and typically you only see that with whiskey.
I have a friend who always orders a bourbon neat
Right.
at every restaurant. She says she always knows what she's getting.
Right, you can't mess that up.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Not a lot of input there.
So, yeah, I mean, can't think of any instances where somebody says, I want a martini neat.
I might have to change that
I would
for
have
you.
to talk to that person. Excuse me, sir. I don't think those words mean what you think they mean.
And that's why we're doing this podcast. So speaking of martinis, I have heard somebody refer to the concept of a dry martini versus a wet martini. That sounds ridiculous to me. The only dry martini I've ever seen was the glass after I finished it. So what does that mean?
So that is a reference to how much vermouth you're adding to the martini. So basically anything with vermouth, you could specify dry or wet.
So does that mean, is that related to the term dry vermouth?
No, it actually refers to how much vermouth, the quantity of vermouth you're putting in. So you
can have a wet martini that uses dry vermouth.
Right, exactly. So wet means more of vermouth.
Okay.
So dry means less vermouth.
Now,
obviously.
is wet and dry, are those terms limited to martinis, or is that for other cocktails as well?
No, actually, it's actually anything with vermouth. You can ask for
but
wet
only
or dry.
vermouth.
Right.
Okay.
But then it's kind of this weird thing of you order Manhattan, which also has vermouth in it, and you say, I would like a dry Manhattan. And from
I
my
say,
perspective,
are you talking about dry vermouth, or are you talking about less
vermouth.
Sweet vermouth?
Right. So there's areas of gray areas where...
So you may want to specify.
Yeah,
if you want a dry something with sweet vermouth, make sure you specify how you want your dry to happen.
Exactly. And this also applies to the coffee world as well.
Really?
So dry and wet are a way of ordering cappuccinos.
With extra vermouth.
Right. No, with extra or less milk. So like a cappuccino, you would order, I want a dry cappuccino. So when you order it that way, what you're signifying is I want espresso and milk foam, basically.
Okay.
No liquid milk or less liquid milk.
That makes a lot more sense here because dry vermouth is
tomato,
still wet.
It's the same thing, right?
Still wet. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about garnish.
Yeah, let's do that.
Changing directions here before we completely lose track. So there's a couple different, I mean, obviously there's pretty common garnishes, which is, citrus peels in various forms.
Right.
But there's also olives and martinis.
Cherries and all kinds of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. But usually when people ask for like a twist in their cocktails.
So like a martini up with a twist?
Right, exactly. I want a Tanqueray martini stirred up with a twist. And I want it dry. That's exactly what we just talked about.
I feel like we're at Starbucks.
I know.
I want a grande frappuccini.
Frappuccini.
With extra olives.
Dry, but kind of wet.
On the rocks.
And I want the caramel sprinkles.
Exactly. No, I think we're onto something.
Ooh, I like it.
Maybe that'll be the food we made up.
But then you could also ask for a twist. And if you just say, I want a Tanqueray up with a twist, what I would assume as a bartender is you want a Tanqueray martini with a lemon twist.
Yeah, typically if you say with a twist, I would say in most cases you're just going to assume lemon, unless it's like a margarita,
99%
right?
99% of the time, you would assume lemon. But you could also specify.
Yeah, feel free to specify if you want lime or grapefruit or
and they all
orange.
kind of have their own kind of unique characteristics. But for the most part, you say with a twist, you're going to get a lemon.
So what if I order a martini and I'm like really hungry and like my table is going to be 40 minutes? Can I just be like, hey, I'd like a martini with 47 olives?
Yeah, you totally could do that.
Is that a thing?
Absolutely. The 47 martini or 47 olive martini.
I heard in a previous podcast episode that I should stop sticking my fingers in the bartender's olive jar.
Don't do that. It's called an appetizer.
Oh, man. Seriously, though, what if can I specify the number of olives? Is that a thing?
Yeah, actually, I heard a really interesting thing the other day, and that was you only ask for an odd number of olives.
Really?
Yeah.
So 47 would work.
Totally. So you either put one.
Or three. Yeah, you never see two.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Somebody was telling me that they actually had one sent back because they garnished it with two and the lady wouldn't drink it.
Wow.
Because it's superstition, whatever, I don't know. But
I have a solution for
you.
you. Eat one.
I know, right? But yeah, there's all kinds of folklore and all kinds of like urban legends and all that stuff around drinking. But.
And on the other side of things, if I was to order a cocktail that typically does come with garnish, you can always just say no fruit.
Right.
And that just means no garnish, right?
Exactly, yeah. So like, for example, vodka tonic. No fruit. That means you're just going to get vodka and tonic. You're not going to get a lime in there.
Makes sense.
Yeah. You could always just say, I don't want no stinking fruit, man.
I don't recommend saying that.
Just like that. With that accent?
No accents. No accents.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can finish off this episode without mentioning two specific cocktails that have a couple of their own special words, so to speak.
Yeah, and you can really start to go down a rabbit hole with this. These are two easy things to kind of separate out. And the first one is the dirty martini.
Yeah, I think this is one we had to mention, and it's just so well known.
Right.
And what that means, if I'm not mistaken, is that the brine from the olive jar is actually put into the drink.
Yep.
Correct?
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And is that another thing that I could say, like, I want it really dirty, or I want slightly dirty?
Right, and at that point, you're telling the bartender how much brine basically to put into the martini.
That makes sense. And then what about the Manhattan?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to order the Manhattan. A very kind of obscure way of ordering it. You only hear it once. I probably only have made maybe 3 or 4 of them in my bartending career, and that is the perfect Manhattan.
Now, we're not just talking about a fantastic Manhattan.
No, we're not.
Not this time.
Not this time. But basically what you're doing is you're taking away half of the sweet vermouth that is typically found in Manhattans, and you're replacing it with dry vermouth.
So you're going to have a Manhattan that has equal parts sweet and dry vermouth.
Right.
And that's what perfect means in general, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even beyond a Manhattan is when you have equal parts sweet and dry vermouth.
Right, exactly. So anything that would have sweet vermouth, you could ask for it perfect. And you would be taking away some of it and adding dry vermouth in
Could
its
you
place.
do a perfect martini?
You
Go the other direction?
Sure. Yeah. I don't see why not. I would probably ask you, I would clarify the order with you. I'm saying, so what you're asking me for is this, right? And then people would say,
sure.
no, actually, I want a Manhattan or a martini made in a specific way because I think that's effing perfect.
Because I think that's perfect.
And I will look at you, and then I will beat you with it.
Well, in reality, I think what's actually going to happen is this is such an uncommon order that chances are pretty slim the bartender is going to know what you're referring to, right?
Right, exactly.
If you're in a craft bar, definitely. If you're in a dive bar,
you may have to
not.
explain it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's the lingo for ordering drinks at a bar.
Yeah, so thanks so much for listening once again. Hopefully you made it to the end of the episode. If you did, I apologize.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and take this episode out for a test drive and see how it's going to work at a real bar. So I walk up to the bar. I order.
Hello, sir.
Hi, sir. Welcome to
Joe's bar.
Yes. Hi, Joe. I would like a Bombay Sapphire Martini stirred up dry with a twist.
Okay, let me see if I can do this here.
Go for it. No pressure.
Bombay Sapphire, so it's a premium. I know you said up with a twist, so it's going to be in a martini glass with a twist of lemon. Mm-hmm. Dry, so less vermouth, and stirred.
Bingo. That's it.
Sweet.
Well done.
Sweet. This is a real memory test.
I know.
Holy cow.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. I really hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope maybe next time you order a cocktail, you have a little bit of fun with it.
Yeah, and I know that as soon as we get off this podcast, I know exactly what I'm going to be making myself.
Ooh. Is it what I think you're going to make?
I think I just ordered it.
I think you did. Does that mean I'm making it?
Uh-huh.
Thanks so much, everyone. We will catch you next week, and until then,
we'll talk to you later.
Enjoy your cocktail.
Yep. Cheers everyone.